The president of the United States, while he's asserting it has nothing to do with race, is objecting to mostly people of color. There have been a few white allies, but mostly people of color going to one knee during the national anthem to protest essentially institutional racism in the United States. Specifically, as I recall, this all began with police killings of unarmed black men. And, and for that matter, I mean, I think it's the third verse of the Star Spangled Banner, is a little racist, shall we say. You can look it up, but, it's a reference to the slaves who went to fight on behalf of the British, as I recall. But it's not the friendliest thing. But that said, I'm not anti Star Spangled Banner or flag. But what Trump is doing is and by the way, Trump is not alone in this. The media is all over this as well. And I realize I'm here, I'm part of the media, and here I am doing it. But it's really important to say this because the rest of the media is not going to say this. And that is that, he's basically just using the media to deflect from all the things that are going on right now. And I think one of the most important is that a U.S. territory filled with 3 million U.S. citizens, Puerto Rico, is devastated from, a global warming amped up tropical storm or hurricane. And Trump would rather not talk about that. That's going to require money. It's going to require resources. We should be sending the Navy down there. We should be sending other parts of the U.S. military that have the ability to land or to dock in Puerto Rico. This is part of the United States. It's a U.S. territory. The same with U.S. Virgin Islands. And they've been absolutely devastated. And I can't tell that Trump is doing anything. But, he doesn't want to talk about that. His spokespeople don't want to talk about that. His minions don't want to talk about that. This is classical, on the one hand, classic race baiting, classic, this is Trump. He's essentially, trash talking black players. I mean, that's what it comes down to. For protesting institutional racism. How dare they? Right. And now, Tom Brady is talking back to him. There's been at least one owner talking back to him. But as this is going on, there's serious stuff happening in the world. I mean, Trump is about to, in all probability, have an epic fail in his most recent attempt to repeal Obamacare, which, by the way, is going to resume again after January 1st. But this thing about, not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, but instead going down on one knee, arguably that's, I would say, even more respectful. I mean, the First Amendment of the Constitution protects our right to dissent, essentially. Our country was founded on dissent. And it was only in 2009 that sports teams started coming on the field for the national anthem. That was 8 years ago. And they started doing it because the U.S. Pentagon was giving them hundreds of thousands of dollars. I saw one story that said that Roger Goodell, when he was running the NFL, sent back $700,000 to the Pentagon and said, thanks, but no thanks. But this whole militarization, this whole hyping up of the military, this came out of George W. Bush lying us into a war in Iraq and stupidly going into a war in Afghanistan when neither one were even remotely necessary. He did it for purely political purposes. And there were not enough warriors for the war. So the Bush administration had to start, leaning on people. Hey, it's a wonderful thing. Let's run ads with the movie theaters, be everything you can be. And let's throw in some good bennies, so if you go in the military, you can also get a college education, et cetera, et cetera. And And all of this, and and let's, let's be praiseful of our military, let them board airplanes first, all that kind of stuff, that comes along with nationalism and militarism that comes along with being at war. It's not unusual. It's not even something that is necessarily in the abstract worthy of criticism. But Trump is behaving as if the teams coming out on the field and standing for the Pledge of Allegiance is something that goes back to Francis Scott Key or George Washington. And I'm sorry, it goes back to 2009 when the Pentagon started saying we need more good press for the military so that, because we're short on cannon fodder. I mean, that's what it came down to. And Trump is turning this thing into a, quote, cultural issue. Well, cultural issues, I mean, historically, this is what the Republican Party does when they don't want to talk about what's really going on. What's really going on is Scott Pruitt, day by day, literally day by day, is devastating the Environmental Protection Agency. Chemical companies no longer seeing inspectors. Big polluters not having to worry. The IRS, they're changing the policies now. So, or at least they want to. So that if you get an earned income tax credit, unless, in other words, if you make less than $25,000 a year, basically, and you get money back from the government, you automatically get audited, which is going to, suck up all the time of thousands of IRS auditors so that they won't be able to audit rich people. You've got Ryan Zinke taking, national monuments like Bears Ears and others that are, not only national monuments, but in many cases sacred places for Native Americans who have reservations nearby and who have historically used this land. I mean, this is what this despicable thing that John McCain and Jeff Flake did with Apache Tears. Despicable. Flipping it for another piece of land and then selling it off to an Australian mining company. But this is what American politicians who take money from groups like Australian mining companies do. But there's serious stuff going on. Now, there's also serious stuff going on with regard, this is not to diminish what Colin Kaepernick started here. It's not to say it's not serious at all. It is worthy of coverage. But the coverage is, in my mind, the wrong kind of coverage. I mean, the coverage should be, okay, look at all these athletes who are taking this position. Why? Why are they doing this? What kind of an America are they envisioning? What specifically about America or about Trump or about our policies are they protesting? Have you heard any conversation, any kind of meaningful conversation about those kind of issues? By and large, not. Maybe on some of the wonkiest of the wonky weekend shows kind of things, but, and my apologies, I missed all of them. I was, at a wedding all day Saturday, and I was flying all day Sunday. I got home late last night, fell into bed, and so I just kind of caught up this morning. But I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of the coverage was not about why are these players doing this? What is it that provoked this? What is the history of this? Where are they going with this? See, I see these protests as the logical extension. This is nonviolent, passive, disruptive protest. This is what Martin Luther King was doing in the 60s and before. This is what the civil rights movement has always done. It's what the women's rights movement did back, prior to the 1920s. It's what Jesus did. This is the highest calling, to call out a social wrong in a way that doesn't disrupt society, that doesn't, in other words, I mean, it's not like, they're throwing tin cans into the stands or shooting off fireworks or something like that. And it's not the kind of intimidating disruptive that the right-wingers do when they show up at their so-called protests with their open carry guns, like we saw in Charlottesville, Virginia. I mean, that's a different kind of protest. And it's also, allowed by the First Amendment. But I mean, if you want protest that's worthy of critique or criticism, You know, how about the ones where the people show, oh, wait a minute, those are white people showing up with guns. I forgot. The last time a bunch of black people showed up with guns, it was Bobby Seale and his friends in California back in the 60s. And within weeks, Ronald Reagan had gun control laws in California. But white people showing up with guns, no problem. So number one, you know, there is a racial component to this. In fact, I'd say it's at the core of the whole thing. And Trump's saying, oh, I never even mentioned race. Well, you don't have to mention race. There's lots. I mean, Lee Atwater taught us that, right? You don't want to say race, just say forced busing in the 60s. You don't want to say forced busing in the 60s. In the 80s, you say tax cuts. And as Lee Atwater said, and everybody knows that's going to help the rich people and hurt the poor people, which is going to hurt the black people, right? This is all about race.